Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. Hey, Just, can you guys hear me? Is this loud enough? Yeah, I'll turn that off. All right, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. That should be good. That should be good. And can you dim that arcade right there? What's that? Yeah, Justin, dim the lights that are just up front, not the ones that are pointing at me, but the ones overhead. Okay, can you guys see me? Yep, and can you see that fairly clearly? Fair enough. All right, we got a 1-minute countdown and we're going to start here. Nice. All right, I guess we will get going. Thank you for showing up, guys. Thanks for your patience. We had a few technical glitches, as is typical. Am I good for sound, Justin? Does that feel okay? Perfect. Is that me? All right. All right, well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is our 5th, I think, or 7th in a series between me and Cam. As far as we understand right now, next week is going to be the We Unify conference here, and they're going to have a legislature meeting with Brian Peckford at the legislature. Then they're going to meet here in the evening, I think Saturday and Sunday. So if you guys, what's that? Yes, I believe so. And I'll be speaking at the legislature as well. They invited me to do that. After my last performance, they thought, yeah, this guy gets people going. So maybe I can get you guys going tonight. All right. So I'm going to take you guys, this is a themed evening. We're going to go in the DeLorean. Who here is old enough to know what a DeLorean is? Good. So we're going to go on our very own Back to the Future adventure right there. So come with me, let's climb into the DeLorean. You guys remember this dashboard? Is this not the most famous dashboard in history? Where do you guys want to go? What year should we go back to? Let's get out of here. This place is terrible. I don't want to go in the future. Let's go in the past. When should we go back? How about the opening night of the movie Back to the Future? How about that? Let's go back to July 3rd, 1985. Buckle up, 1.21 gigawatts, here we go. Boom. I'll probably rewatch this tonight. All right, let's park the DeLorean and let's get out. And the full glory of the 1980s is there to hit us smack in the face. Turns out men are actually highly destructive, hyper-masculine, unapologetic machines of destruction. And you know what? It's very easy to spot the women. They're women. There's no mistake in it. It's hyperpolarized gender expression. Kind of brings nostalgia to my heart, doesn't it? And you want to see comedy, cancel-free comedy culture? Well, if you tune into my favorite back in the day, In Living Color, you will be treated with the inappropriateness of Handyman, a superhero with cerebral palsy who falls out of windows instead of flies out of them. Not a single career canceled over this, mind you. How amazing. Or how about Men on Films? 2 snaps up instead of 2 thumbs up. So extremely stereotypical description of the gay culture, would you not say? Anybody get canceled over this? No. From 1991 to 2010, the #1 genre on US Billboard Top 100 was hip-hop. Who's the majority of the people buying the records and going to the shows? White America. Who's the most recognizable athlete throughout the entire 90s for the entire planet? Guys, take a guess? His airness. Again, celebrated by all the white people in his culture. You start to realize as you relive the 80s and 90s that we had actually achieved a post-racial unified culture where it did not matter what the color of your skin was. We'd actually have achieved the impossible, apparently. So, unfortunately, we can't stay. The DeLorean, I know, I have to go back to work Monday, so I'm going to come back. Let's say I'll pick Canada Day this year, so we'll come back here. Now, we've just spent 12 years in the 80s and 90s, so we're recalibrated to how things used to be. And we get a fresh dose of a reawakening. As we crawl out of our DeLorean, we realize there's such a thing as drag queen story hour, where public schools take pre-K and K-age children to libraries, and they have drag queens introduce them to the normalization of homosexuality and transgenderism. They even use, in this case, this is a little hot mess, they use their sex kink stage names to children. And what does this do? Well, children get accustomed to the idea that this is perfectly normal. What would scare me half to death as a child, if they came out of the back of the library to read me a story, is now told to the child, don't listen to your instincts. There's nothing weird or wrong here. This is totally and absolutely normal. Then I see a world in which Big Pharma and the government and the Pediatrics Association in the US and Canada say, you know what? Puberty blockers are perfectly reversible. There's nothing wrong. This is not an experimentation with general society. You could take a kid at 8, 9 years old, and if the school counselor and the school teacher get it in their heads that your child is transgender, there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop the process. And if the process continues, and I apologize for the next slide, there's such a thing as bottom surgery, where you can take skin and fat from your forearm and recreate it and have the clitoris reposition and the urethra reposition so that a woman can become a man like this gentleman who is showing the scar of his bottom surgery where they farm the skin and the fat. She's obviously been on lots of hormones for a very long time. She is now a he. And that, guess what? If you don't think that's perfectly normal, something's wrong with you because it's now 2022. Remember that post-racial utopia I just showed you? Well, it turns out BLM doesn't think it's happened ever. And so what's the remedy? Well, let's burn every single business district with black, brown, and white-owned businesses everywhere. Let's just burn it to the ground. Why? Because racism. And the U.S. government, most of the media culture say, yeah, this was a proper solution in the summer of 2020 to the amount of racism we have in our country. Marvel Comics offers transgender heroes so that a 10-year-old can, again, if the drag queen story hour didn't drill it into their minds, no, it's true. Changing gender is perfectly mentally and emotionally healthy. So let's just go ahead and do it. Closer to home, British Columbia, a kindergarten teacher was just found last month giving kindergartners masturbation homework. Things such as where you can go in your house to secretly masturbate is discussed between the teacher and the student. They're told not to tell the parents. It's their little secret. Perfectly normal, right? Well, it's perfectly normal in 2022. One of the most vaunted scientific organizations in North America, the Smithsonian, in 2020 came out with a list of items. They placed this in their vaunted Smithsonian Museum, where they said, you know, there are some things in our culture that are just, we could just plain old blame it on whites. And it's something that white people do and other people shouldn't have to be expected to live up to. And what are those things? Well, things like the scientific method, goal-oriented living, proper communication, being on time for work, etc. Now, I don't know about you, but if I tried to sell to a non-white person that I thought this is something I don't expect them to ever achieve because of the color of their skin, what would they call me rightfully so? A racist. This is actual racism sold as non-racism because 2022. Because we're living in clown world, ladies and gentlemen. If you tried to tell your 1985 self that this kind of stuff would be going on now, you probably wouldn't believe yourself. Those of us who are old enough to remember what it was like in those days. And in our world too, we've got digital ID and currency coming down the pipes, which we'll have our special guests talk about in a little bit. And you know what? Just like transgenderism has already gone through the makeover of normalization, guess what's next on the list? Because they're not finished. Pedophilia, it should not be stigmatized, ladies and gentlemen. I know you haven't gone to a gender studies. If you don't have a gender studies degree from UBC, you probably don't understand this complex issue, because what's coming down the pipes is that pedophilia should be rebranded as minor attracted individuals or minor attracted persons, MAP or MAI. Because really at the end of the day, if they don't act out on it, it's just the way that they are, okay? So if you don't think that they can normalize pedophilia, would you have thought in 1985 that they would fully normalize changing the gender of a 10-year-old kid through surgery, right? And here are these unironic tweets that show that, and notice the term in the top right, their hashtag age fluid. Now there's an interesting term to throw on top of gender fluid, because it turns out if you see a 40-year-old man romancing a 10-year-old boy, don't judge them, because they might not only be gender fluid, they might be age fluid. So that might be a 10-year-old girl talking to a 10-year-old boy. Don't be such a bigot and get in the way. Learn to accept complex gender theories. Just because you didn't go to university to get your mind warped through a gender theories degree will excuse your stupidity. Just step aside and don't get in the way. Now, you'll notice that every civilization that has declined, rose and declined, like Greco-Roman culture, celebrated the sex act between grown men and young boys, like in the Roman Senate. It was a common practice. But again, notice, when you see this level of rebranding of normalcy, it is when during a civilization's arc. Exactly. The very end. Well, Doc Brown won't leave us alone, folks. He came again. He goes, guess what? You think it's bad now? Let's go see the future. Okay, I guess I don't have much choice. Where should we go? Where do you guys want to go now? How about just plain old 30 years in the future? What's that? Well, I've already got the slide made up, so it's going to be a little bit more than that. It'll be on your 49th birthday, Blaze. So off we go, bravely into the future. And how many of you here are aware of the World Economic Forum? Who here is aware of that? Who here saw their commercial during their last conference where they said a few things that you can expect to see in the future? What was the first one? You will own nothing and be happy. And also, meat will be a rare treat, because what will be the basis of our diet in the future? Turns out it was true. Now, do you guys remember we taught about Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward? right? Chairman Mao in 1962 said, look at the Western world. It's fully industrialized. They're going gangbusters. They're having a great time. And here we are, China. We're just a bunch of farmers. I know. We're going to do something I'm going to call the Great Leap Forward. And in 5 years, we're going to industrialize all of China. It'll work beautifully. Kind of like AOC and the Green New Deal, right? What happened instead of a Great Leap Forward? What stopped the Great Leap Forward? The Great Famine, where 50 million Chinese people starved to death and kids began disappearing because people were hunting them for food. So central planners, as we've talked about in the previous lectures, have a way of creating, while trying to create a heaven on earth, what do they actually always create? And I mean always. Hell on earth. So not only is bugs what you got to eat day in, day out, and forget if your immune system does not acclimatize to bugs and you have Crohn's disease now, but they didn't really know how to transfer the food source that fast. So from 2030 to 2035, there was a mass worldwide famine in which 60% of the population died. So eating bugs is bad enough. Not having enough bugs to eat is even worse because you're dying while eating bugs. Now remember the you'll own nothing and be happy? Turns out you'll own nothing and be miserable because it turns out it's much harder than the central planners thought to recreate the private market when it comes to house building, house owning, private property, etc. So if you're lucky, you get to rent an RV in these stack of RVs, most of which are actually dated from our period now. Just like in Cuba, if you look at the cars in Cuba, they're from the 1950s. Okay, they're all broken down. People are just keeping them running with bubble gum and duct tape, literally. So, and if you misbehave, by the way, because now you have to have this thing on you at all times, if you get more than 5 meters away from this for more than a minute, you get your social credit score dinged tremendously, and if you can't pay your tab at the RV stack, you're back, most of humanity, 55% of the humanity is actually not even able to get into an RV stack. So now you're at the back of the line with the other homeless people, hoping to get back in 5 years, and this time you better behave. You better keep this little film, this database film, right next to you, even if you're going for a swim. Now, as from birth onwards, we have implants, retinal implants, cochlear implants, subcutaneous implants. What's the purpose? The database, through the Wi-Fi system, sees everything you see, hears everything you hear, and hears everything you speak. And the algorithm sets so that if you hear, speak, or listen to enough wrong think, you get a social credit score ding as well. They can freeze your bank accounts. Okay, so again, we're training them from ground up to be perfectly robotic sheep. This next one, by the way, I literally imagined this last week, that every day we get a drone delivery of a pharmaceutical which we have no idea what's in it, but you better ingest it. Because it triangulates, there's a chip in the gel cap that triangulates with your implants, and it has a trigger when it contacts stomach acid to ensure to the algorithm that you have ingested it. I thought I was making that up. Did anybody see the Pfizer rep at the WF forum this week? They literally have this already. I couldn't believe it. Somebody sent it to me on Instagram, and I'm like, well, I got to reimagine something worse then. Now, you know how everybody here been the victim of inefficient government bureaucracy? Where, yeah, I just happened to be with my driver's license. All of you should lift your hands up. Imagine a world where there isn't enough of the elite ruling class for them to control every ounce of our behavior the way they're planning on or potentially planning on. What are you going to be actually tracked by? Not another person on the end of the line, but an algorithm. So imagine just the mistakes that get made, the frozen bank accounts when you've done everything you're supposed to do, etc. So just the bureaucratic nightmare alone is going to be a nightmare. Imagine adding central planning disasters on top of that. But either way, no bueno. And by the way, all these implants are already registered trademarks, even retinal implants. They're already working on stuff like this. So if you think what I'm saying now sounds insane, just remember what 1985 to 1997 you would have thought of 2022, and let's project along the J-curve at the same rate, okay? It isn't that. Now, most kids have chronic fatigue syndrome. I wonder if it has anything to do with the daily pharmaceutical dose, which we have no idea what it is. You start to get a clue. By the way, you see your kid about once a month because once they're born, they're actually raised by the state, just like in Nazi Germany. So you see your kid very seldom, and everything you say and do with them is perfectly sent back to the algorithm database. So you better be a good boy and girl with your kid. You can't raise them anymore. The state's raising them. Now, turns out that some of them, about 60% of the population, is on some form of gender fluid medication, because you start to see your kids get weird as they develop. You remember back in your day, I didn't develop like this. The algorithms, based on what they say, determine if they're maybe transgender. It's no longer between the school counselor or the school teacher and your kid to determine their fluidity. It's now an algorithm's decision. And mistakes happen, and we're doing the best we can. Now the good news is, ladies and gentlemen, there are free societies in the future. The bad news is it looks a lot like the child colony in Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, where you have to be on the run, you have none of the amenities of modern life, and because a lot of these kids were already chipped and escaped, they can still get rounded up. So you can't be agricultural, we have to be nomadic. So we're right back to square one, 10,000 BC style living. And the elites, although on the other hand, are not living like us. This is from the Hunger Games, the capital city people. And you think that's crazy, but I'll prove it to you in just a second that it's not as crazy as it seems. 25 major city centers on Earth house the elite class. They live in absolute luxury. They have about a 77% rate of gender fluidity, and they have absolutely no discomfort, no needs unmet. They're back on the days of the Pharaoh, when the masses grind away to create a society that a small sliver of elites enjoy. Their lives are absolutely locked into debauchery, pleasure, and ease. And if you try to get within 100 kilometers of these city centers, you're roundly rebuffed by the law and order crowd known as the peacekeepers. Now, if you think this is a bit wild, let me show you some pictures from the Met Gala ball in New York City just from this last month. Elites are weird, okay? They get weird quick. Something happens to your calibration of your sensibilities when you are that elevated outside of normal life and regular work. So, all that being said is to set up the next speaker. What they have called, the World Economic Forum calls this procedural moving forward, this central planning global society, calls it the Great Reset. And the number one thing assisting them will be the monetary reset. And at this point, I'm going to hand the baton over to my friend and financial advisor, Michael Sadu. Michael, come on up.
Ooh, don't touch me there. He's my chiropractor. He kind of touches me there anyway because, okay, we're going to just give you a couple of comments, Emmanuel. We shouldn't have gone back to 1985. We should have all read 1984, first off. That wasn't supposed to be an instruction manual. Back in my day, the way to deal with pedophilia was a wood chipper. And it just pains me to say that the words back in my day, because I'm already sounding old. I got two of my kids here in the audience, and they're like, back in your day, you walked 2 miles to school uphill in the snow all the time. One thing that's really important about private property and the fact that you'll own nothing and be happy is the fact that somebody will. It's not that it's not that nobody won't own it, it's that somebody will, it just won't be you. Now, private property is the foundation of a free society. That's one of the basic 3 tenets of a free society. One of the other things is the family. And when, to your point, Emmanuel, about Nazi Germany, communist, Stalinist, Leninist Russia, the Marxist system is all about the state controlling your children, and it's the breakdown of the family unit. So, great, that was awesome. Unfortunately, it's the truth. So, here's the only diagram that you really need to know. And by the way, I'm going to communicate this entire 10-minute presentation because Emmanuel's only given me 10 minutes in memes, because that's the way I think most people are communicating online now, and that's the way I communicate to my kids. Knowledge of history. Your knowledge of history has an inexorable link to your trust in government. The trust in the state has always been a pull between you and it. That is the big war. It's not between cultures or race. We're divided in so many different ways that we're weak. You know, it's like breaking a bundle of sticks compared to breaking a single stick. The more that the state can divide us, the more that we will be divided and powerless to stand up to the state. John Locke, who, if you haven't seen anything about who John Locke was, or well, obviously he's a was. This was back in about 400 or 500 years ago. Any single man must judge for himself whether the circumstances warrant obedience or resistance to the commands of the civil magistrate. We are all qualified, entitled, and morally obliged to evaluate the conduct of our rulers. Think about that, how history repeats itself time and time and time. It's like that BLM thing you were talking about, right? BLM thinks that it's always been racist when every about 30 or 40 years we go through this cycle, right? Those of you who I see a few whiter hairs or lack of hairs, don't look at my head, but lack of hairs, and you'll remember. You remember when Jordan was commanding or you know, all those rap groups and all that. Another person that I personally am a huge fan of is Ludwig von Mises. And he said, government is the only institution that can take a valuable commodity like paper and make it worthless by applying ink. J.P. Morgan, who was at the table when the U.S. Federal Reserve was created. If anybody's read the Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, it's a monstrosity of a book, but it is so good. He was there among politicians and state rulers and all that sort of stuff at the formation of the Fed. Gold and silver are money, and everything else is credit. So what does that make paper? What does that make paper money? It's a Ponzi scheme, right? And what's really screwed up is that we trade the best thing that we have, our talent, our time, and our energy, and we trade it for something that's worthless. It's worthless. Currency is worthless. Because this little institution, this building in Ottawa, the Bank of Canada, is printing money and devaluing what you have, but we're all chasing borrowed time, borrowed slips of paper that we're putting our grandchildren into debt. We are not the government, just to be clear, but the government is doing that because they have the power of the purse. And then, of course, the mafia and confiscation. You know, just in the last 6 or 7 months, we've seen people that have been arbitrarily frozen, like that woman in Chilliwack or Abbotsford or whatever who donated $40 and couldn't feed her family because her bank account was completely frozen. So let's dig into this. Money versus currency. Real money is a unit of exchange. It's a way to measure a transaction. Right? If Emmanuel and I wanted to barter, if I wanted to get him to crack my back or something, what can I could I go cut his lawn for equivalency? Well, you talked about it at a previous lecture. For anybody that hasn't gone to his YouTube channel, go back and look at some of these previous lectures because they're really brilliant. It's this coincidence of wants. Well, if he doesn't need his lawn mowed, and that's the only skill I have, well, what can I do? Well, I can go cut somebody else's lawn, take that money, and give it to Emmanuel because what he wants is the cold, hard cash. Currency is not money. It is a receipt of money. And if anybody's making notes, or for those of you watching online, I would highly encourage you to watch the Hidden Secrets of Money series by Mike Maloney. It's a 10-part series. Each episode's about a half hour. It's brilliant. But it is a government-controlled monopoly of receipts of future tax dollars. And this is why I say money is a big Ponzi scheme. Real money could be a store of value, where the value of currency is constantly depreciating against real assets. My dad bought his first house in 1970 in Victoria. It was $14,000. That same house today, $1 million. Is the timber really worth that much more? Is the drywall really worth that much? I mean, let's be honest. Houses don't depreciate. Currency depreciates against the value of that tangible real asset. And what about having your capital saved from confiscation or being frozen or from the monetary reset? So there's a couple of options. Number one is bullion. Silver, silver bars, gold coins, and silver coins. Okay, this is real money. This was what was, and no, it's not yours, Kara. This was what we used as trade, because why? Because gold is fungible, it's divisible, it endures. All that money sitting at the bottom of the Caribbean from those Spanish galleons is still sitting there, and it's not becoming decrepit after 500 years in salt water. That's pretty amazing. Commodities, such as having rights on exploration properties, private mining shares, oil and gas rights and royalties. Crypto, everybody's talking about Bitcoin, especially because the price of Bitcoin came way down this week. But let's suggest that there are asset-backed, gold-backed, bullion-backed cryptocurrencies out there. I prefer anything that's asset-backed. I don't prefer anything that's speculative. And of course, Bitcoin, there's only, however many, 21 million units going to ever be produced. But what's that valued speculative? And a tax-exempt insurance contract, okay? And I'm going to give you some history on why that works within the Canadian landscape in order to create a tangible asset, okay? So in 1847, the first Canadian life insurance contract was placed on this guy, Hugh C. Baker, who was the brand new president of Canada Life at the time, a company that was started in 1845. He bought Canada's first dividend-paying, properly designed whole life insurance contract. In 1867, 20 years after that, the BNA Act and the original Canadian Constitution Act, which adopted the unwritten principles, because remember, England didn't have a written constitution. It was based in 3 documents: 1215's Magna Carta, the Royal Proclamation of 1763, and the Act of Union in 1840. Those 3 documents provided the context for a constitution of sorts in England. And the BNA Act and the Constitution Act took all those documents and formalized it for Canada and separated the powers of province and the federal powers. And in 1917, the Temporary War Measures and War Tax Act, this lovely document, which was never supposed to stick around, and now we are all paying tax in perpetuity because... Oh, none of you have a good answer for that. Oh, okay. So insurance is tax exempt. It has, and I want to make sure, very clear, you want the wording of the contract. You don't necessarily want a big policy and stuff like that. You want the contract because it has precedence against all those tax documents. So within the act, it is a preferred asset, okay? So you control the use and liquidity of the capital while it's in there. Use it to perform the function of banking to finance everything you buy. So essentially, you're seceding from the financial institutions. At the end of the day, in a asset failure, assets and your money will fail in the following order: non-guaranteed securities such as a stock or bond portfolio, banks. How many people realize that banks, when you make a deposit at a bank, your money's actually not even yours anymore? It falls under their financial asset, on the financial statements as a liability. They owe that money back to you. And insurance contracts are the last to fall, other than real money, right? Real money. And what about protection against seizure from the state? Well, the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association confirmed with the Ministry of Finance when that whole bank freeze thing was going on that life and health insurance contracts will not be considered seizable under the Terrorist Financing Act. Why? Because it's exclusionary. They're only going to write if you're a good risk, right? So they also, because of the widows and orphans benefit of the death benefit of life insurance, they don't want to stand in the way of that. So if you have capital in there, it is protected from both tax and from seizure. So what's the best choice for you? Don't stress out with a million different options, guys. Imagine you have the worst case scenario and the best case scenario. If you plan for the best case scenario, things are going back to normal. We're going to get some reasonable people in Parliament or the legislature. Good luck with that. Because the whole system is a systemic issue. It's a nonpartisan issue. Doesn't matter who's in power, they're still playing the same game. But if you plan for both the best and worst case scenario, then anything between these 2 points is just a blend of those 2 points. You don't have to think, okay, well, what if this happened? What if this happens? Just stay calm. Be emotionally strong. And realize that if you have both spectrums covered, this side and this side, you're good. That's my opinion anyway, which is not necessarily financial planning advice. I'm not here saying that it is. Start with the end in mind and engineer a plan in reverse. And what I'm saying is, well, should I buy little ounces of gold, or should I do an insurance? Like, should I get into mining? What does what you're doing give you? And I think too many people say, well, I heard about this, so therefore I'm going to do this. And then you'll see them, they'll do this and this and this and this. And they're flopping all over the place. Whereas I'm going to suggest that you should always start with the end in mind and reverse that plan backwards. Where do I need to be? What is the end goal? Maybe you want to go to Costa Rica. Maybe you want to go to that free city in Honduras on Palomino Island or whatever. They're creating a free society. Maybe that's where you want to go. Maybe you want to stay in Canada. I don't know. What does that look like? Well, have you thought that through? And unfortunately, most people give their 2-week vacation better thought process than what they really want to do when they grow up, so to speak. So at the end of the day, consider all your risks, educate yourself, and recognizes that history repeats itself and we're fools to ignore it. So with that, I'll pass it off. I get to play chiropractor.
Thanks for that, Michael. That was super informative and awesome, really good thoughts. So my colleague and I were just invited to give a brief presentation on Bitcoin, which you've probably heard of, and just in lieu of all the, the things up in the air about the, Great Reset, the banks, the seizures of our money in our bank accounts. We just want to give an option of an alternative that could be possible. So we want to bring to you a representation of what Bitcoin is and how we can use it and how it can be an alternative to this system. So what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a digital payment network made as an alternative to government currency. So it doesn't rely on any government institutions, no centralization. And so, yeah, instead of being owned and controlled by a company or a state, it's decentralized and distributed. Anyone in the world can send, receive, and verify transactions in the Bitcoin network. And it was created, well, one of the forefront aspects of it was that it was created with a limited supply programmed into it. So instead of the infinite money printing that we get with the fiat money, the government issued currency, we actually have a programmatic fixed supply. We have a finite supply. And so that allows for the free market dynamic of supply and demand to play out very well. Yeah, and so the current amount of Bitcoin in circulation is around 19 million, and there's 21 million that will ever be in existence. And so how was Bitcoin started? Well, it was created after the 2008 financial crash in the housing market and the bank bailouts. You probably heard of that. And so there was a man who was kind of a hacker, computer nerd guy, and his name was Satoshi Nakamoto, or that's at least what his stage name was. Nobody exactly knew who he was. But anyways, he came up with this idea that instead of taking part in this financial system, he saw the issues with it. He saw that the government was bailing out these banks when in a free market system, what would happen is that they would have to adapt or they would fail. they would have to, society would have to completely organize their economic structure. And so he saw the issues with that, and he was saying, hey, I need to make something that doesn't rely on the state, that doesn't rely on these corrupt politicians. And so he came up with this idea, and Bitcoin started very, very organically, in contrast to many of the cryptocurrencies out today, where there's a developer and a company that generates 100 billion, trillion, quadrillion of them and sells them for $10. It was organic growth, and people were allowed to allow the free market dynamic to play out with the valuation of Bitcoin. And the first block of Bitcoin was mined in January 2009 by the creator.
Indeed. And now we shall get into aspects of a sound currency. First of all, limited supply. Is this mic good? Limited supply. As we've already discussed, there are 21 million Bitcoins possible to be mined, and 19 million have already been mined. So there's no inflation possible with Bitcoin. Durable. Bitcoin cannot be destroyed. It can be mined, but it cannot be, you can lose your password, but you can't destroy Bitcoin. In demand. Bitcoin is quite in demand nowadays, and it's most likely demand is most likely only going to go up. Easily tradable. There are many Bitcoin networks available for you to trade online. You can also trade with your friends. And decentralized. There are no Bitcoin central servers. Unlike many cryptocurrencies, the data for Bitcoin is available to be seen publicly, and there are no servers for it. Now, Bitcoin versus other mediums of exchange. For fiat currencies, which is just government-issued currencies, they have an unlimited supply. It's very cheap to print, and they're extremely susceptible to inflation. They have a very wide history of manipulation, as we've seen. The transactions, as we've also seen with the trucker convoy, very easily censored. It's of course centralized, and its surveillance is very prevalent. And then it's also, however, widely accepted, which is the one reason why it's any good. Bitcoin has a finite supply, 21 million, so no inflation, no censorship, frauds, or hacks. It's decentralized. It's extremely quick and cheap to send transactions to other people, and you can retain your privacy as well. However, the two cons: limited history, limited acceptance at the moment. Gold, that's another good one. It's got a finite supply as well. It has some market manipulation, not much. It has, however, in the past been confiscated, such as the Executive Order 6102 from the United States in 1933, where they made it illegal to own more than 5 ounces of Bitcoin. Gold, yeah. It is very highly durable, though, has an extensive history, widely accepted. However, it is rather hard and expensive to transport in large amounts. How do you buy Bitcoin? Well, if you're interested, you can always do it online. I use bullbitcoin.com. It's quite cheap. You can also use these handy little things, Bitcoin ATMs downtown. You can also do it at most coin shops on Fort Street. And when you have Bitcoin, what do you do with it? Well, you can save it. You might have heard the phrase HODL, used by Bitcoin collectors. It just means hold on for dear life. Just use it as you do for, gold. You can save it. You can trade it. There's a new coin shop downtown. I think it's called Bitcoin Victoria, and you can actually trade your Bitcoin for gold and silver. And of course, you could sell it. You can always play it like the stock market and sell it in a few years, see if you made any profit. In conclusion, Bitcoin's at the top, gold and silver close second, and there's government money. Thank you for watching.
Well done, you little knuckleheads. I've known these guys since they were, well, that's my son, the guy with the two colored sleeves, and that's his class. I've known you since what? You're this big, Darius? Yeah. I've done everything but change your diapers, because I have changed your diapers.
Back in your day.
Yeah, back in my day. My little brother's actually 14 years younger than me. I've changed his diapers too, and he's watching right now, so hi. Okay, so we looked at I'm going to briefly come through two final points, then we're going to bring these guys back on stage for a Q&A. We'll have a mic passed around for Q&A, then we'll be in the back for the snacks, open to questions as well. So if you're more of an introvert, not an extrovert question asker, hang on tight. I'm going to finish with two other ways, because this whole talk is about what can we do with what's happening. Got to do something with your money. You're hard, and these guys are the experts to ask, Mike and Blaze and Darius. You've already got a certain amount of savings. If you don't have real estate or mining contract money, but you have money that you don't want it to melt value, that's what we just went through as far as the strategy. Education. Okay, most people don't realize that the current education system we know of is brand new historically. Okay, and I'll show you just how small a slice of the timeline it takes. Now, remember the all the ancient wonders of the ancient world, right? Like the Colossus of Rhodes, the pyramids, the Taj Mahal, you name it. Were people who built these things, did they go to a certified school to do that? No. There was the master-student-apprentice relationship, which takes care of 99.9% of educational history. Okay? Our current system, the only concept we have of school is sit in a class like this, wait for the bell to ring, go to the next class, get your degree at grade 12, and now you're ready for real life, right? The Gothic cathedrals, before there was hydraulics or combustible engines, hand-built before there were schools. So how did they learn how to do that? Do you know that we could not reproduce these architectural feats today? No one knows how to do this anymore. And you remove the hydraulic engine as well, we're done. You might build it, but I ain't going to go pray in it. I'll pray before I go in it. All right? Renaissance art. When did we peak in the arts? After schooling had been implemented? And art schools? No, before there was such a thing as schools. When there was master, student, apprentice. This is obviously Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel centerpiece right there. And this is the Pieta by Michelangelo. He was a stone worker as well. He grew up. Are you guys hearing me okay? Am I making it okay? He grew up, his parents owned a stone quarry. So he just handled stone, moved it, saw sculptors come and go and buy stone from it, and he was just there, and he lived and breathed stonework. Once again, there is nobody on earth who can reproduce this right now. It would take hundreds of years before we could get back to one person on earth being able to do this with their hands. Okay? Mastery before there were schools. Cambridge, one of the oldest universities in the West, 1096 it was established. The people who built and even taught there never went to school. Would you figure that out? Not even Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton was tutored at home, homeschool style. Okay? Alexander the Great, homeschooled by Aristotle himself. Went on to conquer the world. I mean, maybe he could have used a little more, ethics class. But Isaac Newton, again, the chair of Isaac Newton is the highest level of physics. That's when Stephen Hawking held that chair at Oxford before he passed away. He never went to school. What happened? Why would we think schooling is so important? Who's this guy? Martin Luther, not King Jr., the activist, the original OG Martin Luther. He goes to the castle in Wittenberg, Germany, and he nails the 95 Theses on the wall in 1517, October 31st, and he says, guess what? This is the death knell of the expert class, okay? Because up until then, you want to know what the Bible says so you can go to heaven? Who do you have to access? Because you can't read it, it's in Greek and Latin. The expert class, the clergymen, they held the keys to the kingdom. Martin Luther King says, no, they don't. And we're going to actually, it just so happens that his lifetime coincided with the invention of the printing press. And at one point, 2/3 of all written materials on planet Earth were Martin Luther's writings. Okay? He said, we're going to make the Bible in regular German so that everybody can access the Bible themselves. That little piece of knowledge and ethos went into the Western world's mind, and it was one of the reasons why we ended up with the United States Constitution, Bill of Rights, and the Western world. We did away with the kings and the experts. We said we're going to be self-ruled. Now, did you know that the literacy rate before schools were invented, guess how old people were on average when they could read back before schools were invented in the 1850s? About 4 and 5 years old. Okay, why was it? Who was teaching them? There was no school board. There's no federal education system. Mom and dad, because there were materials written around, just like you kids were hunting and farming and having children by the time they were 16. Master-student relationships. So this is the 1600s in the States. Some states began making education compulsory, but what was that compulsory education like? The parents in a village hired a teacher who was directly accountable to them to teach their children. So you don't have that blue-haired, gender-fluid kindergarten teacher teaching them how to masturbate, your kindergartners, when you don't even know what's going on, and then if you complain, maybe you're a bigot. So where did the modern school system emerge? In the late 1700s, the country known as Prussia, which doesn't exist anymore, it's basically Austria and northern Germany, they began a dangerous slide, which was an extension of the Enlightenment period. Unfortunately, after Christianity built the Western world and the scientific revolution, as is wont to do as human beings, we said, you know what? I don't think Christianity is working. So we're going to do something different called no God thinking. And so the removal of God from culture began. And as I said in the previous lectures, what happens to a job posting when one guy steps down? Somebody's got to take the job. So mankind becomes God. And what does that look like in education? We, the government, are going to decide what every household teaches their children. Because why? Because we are in the business of making heaven on earth, says the hive mind of human elites, when they take God's job as a centralized autocratic regime. Now, a guy from the U.S. named Horace Mann studied the Prussian system where they had people in school, every curriculum decided by a central government bureaucratic structure, and then John Dewey came along as well. Horace Mann, the guy on the right, is the one who came up with the age-segregated school system, where everyone you see in your classroom is exactly your age. That's brand new. That's 1860s onwards, not human history, when we were doing things like Gothic cathedrals and Renaissance art. Now, John Dewey was a highly secularized individual who began to remove, in earnest, Christianity from the curriculum in the U.S. And he basically helped, alongside guys like Carnegie and Rockefeller, to create larger and larger schools, these mass high schools. We have 1,100 students, 2,000 students, more and more controlled by a central bureaucratic system. Rockefeller has an interesting quote. He says, "I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers." And essentially he's like, I want people, because most people are dumb, I want them ready for factory work, which was the very reason they had a bell going off, and you look at modern US and American and Canadian high schools, it looks like a factory. It was explicitly done to create mediocrity in the mind. Now what's ironic is all major innovations throughout history have not come from elites like the Rockefellers or Carnegie or Dewey, etc. These elites get a strange, perverse perspective on humanity when they start playing God. Where do innovations come from? Who was Albert Einstein before he invented the general and special theory of relativity? He was working a job, then going home at night as a hobby doing physics. He was not the chair of Isaac Newton at Cambridge, okay? Where did the combustible engine get built? Someone tinkering in a barn. Where did the operating system for Microsoft get created? In a government branch full of elites who went to Harvard? No, a high school or college dropout by the name of Bill Gates, who, with the fortunate things he's done since, created the system. Save it for the Q&A. Steve Jobs and company, they built a multi-trillion-dollar company. Where did it all start? In some weird, obscure, middle-class suburb garage. Okay? From the mass of the peoples come these innovations historically. So the idea that we need specialized elite systems, as again, does not supported by history. And of course, the Theodor Adorno and the other Frankfurt schools, once the centralized, centrally controlled apparatus of education, modern education, was in place, a pathogen began to be pumped through it, okay, known as Marxism. We got to today, ladies and gentlemen, and my previous lectures talk about this, through the education system. We were not invaded like Red Dawn, the movie Red Dawn in the 80s, where the Russians just, boom, come on in. All the best stuff's from the 80s, by the way, just so you know. Red Dawn, we get invaded militarily, we get taken over militarily while we're strong and healthy and happy. No. We were corroded from the inside out over 70 years through the education system. And if you think centralized schooling that we have today is somehow great, delivers great results, look at an 8th and 7th grade reading list from 1908. The books listed on there range from the classics of the Middle Ages to the 1900s. Most university students today have not read this much. Classical literature, philosophy, differing viewpoints. We have seen a decline in quality, as is usually the norm when a government takes over anything. It used to be 50%. Now Barna redid their study 2 years ago, or 2019. 64% of Christians leave the faith in their 20s, usually after going to university. Why? Because they have gone from K through 12 through university in a seminary for Marxism, they don't call it that, but that is what's going on. Now, the schooling system as it's designed pretty much only rewards that one blue piece of the pie on the right-hand side, logical mathematical skills. So what happens to the other 9/10 of the children's gifting that are gifted differently? They think what after 12 years in the system? They think they're stupid when they're brilliant, right? So saying that one type of intelligence is better than another type is like saying one sport is more athletic than another. Wrestlers are very athletic, but a rock climber, a free climber, you try doing that, you put me right there as a former wrestler at that height, I'm dead, right? It's special adaptation for special circumstances. That's for intelligence as well as athletics. So what we are going to do going into the future is we're going to need an alternative. We've homeschooled all 4 of our children, okay? And with 3 hours a day, instead of 6 hours of schooling plus 2 hours of homework, in 3 hours a day, Blaze, when he graduated, got the highest possible score you can get on the math exam in provincials. No homework, half the schooling, a third of the workload. How did that happen? Right? Is it that we're so smart? Maybe. Maybe you are that smart. Or is it that the system's that bad? Right? Now, that's my wife's contact information. If Becky can raise her hand really quickly. She'll be running a table in the back after Q&A. If you have any questions, she'll be running a designated learning system here at Oakland's for anybody who's interested in an alternative learning style for your children, starting in September of 2022. So make sure to talk to her. Last point. As much as I agree with most of what Pierre Poilievre says, can we just wait on him to come save us? Is Pierre going to swoop in and just smack Trudeau upside the head, kick Chrystia Freeland in the legs, and just free us from this tyranny? No. As Mike says, as the Indians used to say to the Americans, the left wing and the right wing belong to the same bird. Now, I think there's better governance than not. I certainly hope certain people can get into power. But if just waiting for federal and provincial elections to save us is silly, because it may or may not happen. So, what's happening this fall in Victoria, the Greater Victoria South Island region? Local elections. Unfortunately, I'm going to run, but I'm one Google search away from being discovered to be an insane maniac, knuckle-dragging troglodyte, okay? So I may or may not be able to get in. Hopefully they won't do their homework on me, right? I'm going to be doing it, but you can become a part. There's 9 school trustee positions coming up in October, okay? There's every city, every municipality, Oak Bay, Saanich, Esquimalt, and Victoria right now are doing their mayor and their councils all up for re-election. You guys are able to run for these things, school trustee, council, etc. Yes, this is what I said. There's basically, and I'll cut right to the chase here, nothing's actually been released, specifics, and it won't be until July, early August, so the time is still able, you can still run. All you need to be is a Canadian citizen without a felony and a BC resident for at least 6 months. You don't even have to have been in the city or the municipality you're running for more than a week or so. So that's been done away with. You have to have 25 electors to nominate you. Now, what's an elector? I emailed the municipality. Someone who can vote. So in this room, every one of you is an elector if you're eligible to vote. This is what you'll do. I did a little screenshot. You can go to esquimalt.ca, you go to their government bylaws thing, you click on that. I'm actually going to skip by this. I did one for every single municipality, but you guys are an educated crowd. You can do your own homework. And you basically go and look up for the specifics, the deadlines, and the forms you have to fill out for you to be able to run. Now, an important thing, there are what's called elector organizations, like the Vancouver Island Voters Association. Pretty much the only one anywhere in the island that's aligned with our views. They were pro-truck convoy, etc. What these guys do is they're made up of thousands of members who are all electors. They're certified by the government as what's called an elector organization. And it's simple here because these are the only ones we'd be going with, the Viva. You go to their website, you can email them. If they back you, that automatically gives you a nomination of way more than 25 electors. You don't have to go and annoy your friends with, come on guys, I'm going to save the world, starting with Victoria. You don't have to do that. You can go right to the source, but bug your friends also. If you guys, make sure you contact me if you want to support me as I run for council or trustee, school trustee. I might run for the Francophone board actually, but they know me too well, and they don't like me. Okay, so all you need, you actually have to have an open bank account, by the way. You can get a max donation of $12.50 per donor. There's a max amount that you can take for your campaign. It's different for each municipality. But again, there's still time. Go home, look this up if you're interested. We got to do something, folks, because that 2020, everyone wants to love to read about history and the good guys and the brave people, and then comes time for us to act. And we're kind of like, maybe I'm not one of those people. I know how it feels. But unfortunately, like we went back to 85, we came back to the present, and it wasn't well. The future is still unwritten, ladies and gentlemen. We got to do something. And protecting your money, your past labor, educating the next gen. This is a generational conflict. We're not going to do this in 2 months, 2 years, whatever. We're entering our historical moment. We had a great run so far. It's been real easy, real nice. The time for sitting around and just knowing what's going on is over, because now you're just in the bleachers at Auschwitz. How does that help anything? We got to get active. Get active, educating your friends and family. We got to start being part of the fabric of the political culture from the grassroots up. That's what we got to do. Thank you for coming. I'm going to invite my colleagues up to the stage for question and answer. Is my Vanna White in the house? Yes, here she comes. Don't assume, no, here she, look how beautiful she is. So this is live stream. This is live stream, so put your hands up if you have questions and wait for the mic, or else nobody on the recording or the live stream can hear what you're saying. Make sure you put it away from you when you're talking, or else you get the...
So just a quick comment on what he was saying about the education system. There's historically two systems of education. One was a master apprentice, which is the Freire system, and the Lyceum education system is a testing system. So it's memorization. How much do you remember? How well can you test? And that's success. A Freire system is one where you sit, like think about Athens, right? And when you're sitting in a philosophy class and, you know, Aristotle's up there and you're like, but I disagree and here's why. And you'd have this round table and debate, and there was this a master apprentice thing, right? And then that, to your point in history, but the Lyceum and Freire system, so look those up.
And C.S. Lewis, when he was teaching at Oxford, pretty much had the master student apprentice Athens-style school. Any questions? Yes, go ahead.
What about the mark of the beast?
What about it? You have any specific question?
How does that play into the future? The Antichrist?
All right, mark of the beast. I think that there's a few different things that you could say. A lot of people are saying, well, it's actually a physical thing. It's a mark in your hand. It's a mark in your forehead. You can't transact or do anything without this thing. And my wife and I were in a Bible study. Sorry, we're still connected here. My wife and I were in a Bible study, and the point was brought up, you know, as we move into people getting, you know, you hear about in Sweden or whatever, where it was those injections, and you go bleep, and you'd open your door, and bleep, you'd pay for things, and it was in your hand. But I don't think it was written, the Bible was written in a time where that kind of technology existed. I think it is more the mark is the way you think and the way you act with your hand, like the way you actually do things with your hand. The way you act, the way you think, that's the mark of the beast, in my opinion, the way that I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add.
I resoundingly disagree with my colleague. Yes, it was written at a time where that technology, but John was brought into a vision of the future. Again, we don't know what it is, but it is something without which you cannot buy, sell, or trade. And it is, the word forearm in the Greek of the time means anything that's not your bicep. So it can be wrist, thumb, actual forearm, or it says forehead as well. They have already talked about, is this thing still on? Yeah. Okay. They've already talked about the fact that if you were to have an implantable chip that holds all of your financial information, that'd be the best, most practical place to put it. On your forehead, you just walk right out the store. There's a head-level scanner. You just hold your groceries, and either the door stops in your face, or you walk out with your DVDs, or you just scan your hand because it's the most useful dexterity tool we have, right? So I think it's more along the lines of an actual financially bound, hard system like that. Do you guys have anything to add?
I agree.
What happens to Bitcoin when the internet goes out?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so I would say one of the main weaknesses is that it is reliant on interconnectivity. So in the event of global internet outages, then you would not be able to send or receive transactions. But there have been groups of people who have been utilizing Bitcoin on ham radio. So theoretically, the technology is there that you can be sending Bitcoin transactions with radio, with your radio telecommunications. And then there's also technology for satellites, so we can use direct satellite, interconnectivity. So that is a limitation, and then the internet systems are controlled by a few major internet service providers around, at least in North America. So it is resting on a centralized base layer, but I think that's just the best we have to work with in that situation. But if it is necessary, then given that the innovation in the first place brought about Bitcoin, I'm sure that people would be able to innovate to come up with solutions to that. And like I said, use ham radio or satellites or just local areas using Bitcoin individually.
It's funny passing this around. Have you seen the movie The Matrix? Where those guys would come up to a level where they could access the mainframe, hack into the mainframe, do whatever they needed to do inside the matrix, and then get out, right? So, I mean, I think The Matrix is a really awesome movie, and it's a really good allegory of what we're going through in society. But, if the internet, if it's like an EMP, blah, 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 and you have a complete non-event of the non-use of internet, that's one of those worst-case scenario things that you need. Hey, if you're thinking more along that line and you want to plan for along that line, then yeah, those are things that you need to consider.
I think it's my turn. As someone who has no family or companion work into the crypto, started to look into it with the truckers. Now the Canadian government went and said, oh, we need more of this and that for proof and wallet and everything else. So what was all that about?
So you sort of, the government was trying to do their regulations, like?
Yeah, they created a wallet like 2 days before the Emergency Act. And then all of a sudden the Emergency Act happened, and then it's like, hey, we need to have access to re-verify your whole wallet scenario. So what was happening with all that?
Okay. So yeah, during the trucker convoy, the government was recognizing cryptocurrency and how it's a sidestep of the fiat bank system. So they were trying to play their dirty little games in that too. They were trying to say, hey, we need to freeze them because they donated, but you can't do that. So they were trying to shut down certain cryptocurrency exchanges. They were saying you cannot allow these people, certain people who have been on record for donating, you can't allow them to buy their cryptocurrency, their Elon Musk coin anymore. So they were trying to do that with Bitcoin, not successful. They're not able to censor any transactions. They're not able to stop anyone from donating to the trucker convoy. Did you have another element to the question as well?
Sorry, I had to get it back for a second. So then if I go back and check, that is all collapsed and fallen to the wayside then?
All their attempts of
Yeah.
doing that? Well, certain
On
cryptocurrencies.
certain platforms.
Yeah, certain
Okay.
cryptocurrencies are more centralized, so they have a group of developers or a company, and so the state was able to regulate them and kind of restrict them. So some cryptocurrency wallets, one of them called MetaMask, which is an Ethereum wallet. Ethereum is the second largest cryptocurrency. It completely blocked. I know for the Ukraine as well, it was blocking Russian users from transacting with Ethereum. And yeah, I think there was stuff with the trucker convoy too. The Canadian government was trying to stop them.
Oh yeah. I probably got flagged because, I donated more than 50. Okay, thank you.
So have you heard of Aubrey Cottle, alias Curtainer? He's this young man whom the government has been using to hack accounts of pedophiles, but he claims that he was also the one who hacked all the Freedom Convoy's donations. And there's a map that he came out with in Ontario showing even their postal codes, knowing where they live and everything, got all the information. So given that fact that they can still, that there are people who have the ability to hack accounts, and the fact that we don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is, and I don't know if there's anyone here who knows Japanese, but so I might be wrong about this, but I was researching just now because I thought his name must mean something. And they say Satoshi means enlightened or wise, and Nakamoto means middle or base. And and so I can't help thinking that it's a honeypot. I've also gone into other websites before that they were saying that this is the pseudonym for what this it's actually a project of the CIA. And so how can you be sure that in the Great Reset, that'll be part of the social credit, that they can just shut your account, they can get a hacker to just shut your account in Bitcoin, or just shut your Wi-Fi service. They can shut the Wi-Fi of any individual, and all your money's gone.
That's a really good question. So for the Satoshi Nakamoto, that was his pseudonym. Nobody actually fully knows who he is. He covered his tracks as well as he could, I guess. He was part of a group of cryptographers, just a fringe nerd group. And with the accounts before, all the accounts for the trucker convoy that were being hacked or being censored, those were all just fiat bank currencies. They were PayPal, e-transfers. And for Bitcoin and why it can't just be hacked in the future, and regardless or not if it was made by a CIA operative, I don't know, maybe he was. Regardless of that, the code for Bitcoin is open source, which means any person can go on the internet and download it and see every line of code and see exactly what's happening. This is 100% transparent, and no single entity is able to modify the code. So, and since there's so much money on the line, since the market cap of Bitcoin's over $1 trillion, there's already a huge incentive to hack it for the government to try and stop money laundering, stop anything. but they haven't been able to. And obviously they have billions at their disposal, and the fact that they haven't already, I think really shows the security of the network.
Two things. Nothing is guaranteed, and nothing is completely safe, which is why you should have some in this, something in this, something in this, something in this. It's not just about returns. That diversification across different asset classes is important, but that's why you don't just have your real estate in one city. For example, if all you had was a house in Calgary over the last 10 years, you'd have lost significant dollars because of the oil crash and things like that. But if you had half your properties in Calgary and half your properties elsewhere, like maybe Vancouver, then your portfolio would be on average up. So it's also not only with returns, but it's also with the risk. There's associated risk with every action that you take, and it's important that you have different things in your repertoire, so to speak, to combat the monopoly of government. Like, if you're in Chicago and you're bootlegging alcohol in the 1930s, who's going to come knocking at your door? Al Capone, right? It's the same thing as Chrystia Freeland or Justin Trudeau knocking on your door. And I don't say those names just because, I don't like those people. I'm just saying they represent the people in power right now today. If it was Harper, it would be 10 years ago, I'd be saying Harper the same thing, right? I'm an equal opportunity offender. So government is like the mafia in that they hate competition. When without, like, for example, Bitcoin, gold, doing things through different avenues of finance, it diminishes the power of controlling the economy, which is the way that the central banking system is set up. Does that make sense? So make sure you're diversified.
And yeah, Michael was talking about the risk with anything, and we have to consider that in the 1930s, gold was made illegal to own gold individually. And so really, when people say, oh, well, Bitcoin, gold, this fiat currency, we're just working with what we have in the moment that we have it and thinking of what is going to be the best in the future. But obviously, there's still that risk. The SWAT could come knock on your door and say, hey, where's your gold? Hey, where's your dollars? And they could come and say, hey, give me your phone. I'm going to take your cryptocurrency wallet. Tell me your password. So there's obviously all the possibilities, and if things get to that point, then I think things, immediate valuable things like food, ammunition, water filters is probably going to be more useful if we're being faced with the imminent threat of being physically stolen from with our gold or our Bitcoin.
And more on that gold stuff, the government agents actually did raid people's private homes and businesses in the 1930s when they banned gold, banned owning more than $100 worth of gold, which is approximately 5 ounces.
I believe one of you mentioned that there's a business in Victoria where you can trade Bitcoin for silver or gold.
Yeah, it's called Bitcoin Victoria. I just saw that today. I don't know anything about it yet, but I'm planning to do some research on that. I was just looking at some coin shops today in Victoria, and that was one of the ones that came up.
Yeah, hello? Yeah, the people at the top of the food chain, they're not going to stop, obviously. They planned this for a very, very long time. There's also another idea to take our country back or secede. We need the great arrest. The question is, who's going to arrest these criminals? Because someone has to pay for this because they turn our lives upside down. So how do we get people to arrest these criminals? Because they're not going to stop. I cannot travel in Canada. I cannot even leave Canada. There's people in Tonga, they're stuck. They can't leave Tonga unless they get the injection. So how do we go about arresting these people? Because they're at the top of the food chain. They've controlled everything. Biden, Johnson, Macron, Trudeau, like, they bought everybody. The banks, they bought the banks. I mean, you know, I'm thinking about, 800,000 strong men say, we're done. Turn around, we're going to arrest you. You know, like, I don't know, what is your solution? Because they're not going to quit, obviously.
Yep, and I mean, tonight was sort of about that. Number one, if we can create a parallel economy, if 10% of the population opted out of fiat currency, I think more like what's the tipping point again that they theorized, 3 to 5%? When 3 to 5%, like, not a lot of people opt into a parallel economy, whether it's gold-based or crypto-based, all of a sudden there's a watershed moment that starts to happen. And the reason I talked about local politics is, anybody here tracked the Loudoun County school board meetings between parents and the school board in Virginia State? In one election cycle, because of the amount of online learning that was going during COVID lockdowns, parents started to hear, like, what are they teaching my kids? What the heck? What? No, pornographic materials, gender confusion, etc. Well, the parents, the one people you don't want to piss off is moms, okay? Trust me, I've been married for 20 years. There's certain people, I'd rather piss off some tough guys at the gym than old misses here at home. So when we stand up and say we're going to get involved in politics, I'm not joking about, I'm going to run for local politics. I don't want to. I hate politics. I'm a businessman. I want to live my quiet life, right? Which right now is still quiet and prosperous. But I'm seeing the cliff edge coming, and I don't want to be scrambling at the last minute. So we got to scramble to protect our earned assets, which is why the money talk was. And if we learn and start to trust parallel economies, we can create an avenue where they lose power, right? And if we start getting involved, if we make up the majority of the local government structure, well, then things start to happen. Then we start to produce provincial level electable politicians. If more and more cities, and I do believe the majority of people think more along they did a study where it's something like, in the States, less than 5% of people actually buy into the gender fluidity BS. They're just too afraid to do anything about it. But if they start to see school trustee nominees and elected people say what they're thinking out loud, you can get a tipping point, right? We as people have to act locally and organically. Politics, parallel economy, and making sure that because we're in a generational conflict, we're not just sending our children to the public system, where they're going to a seminary of dystopia, right? That's the only thing we can do. Personally, my extra hot sauce on my secret plan is I trust God, right? Like, I'm putting it in God's hands, saying, you've put me in this time. It may not go well. The Bible does talk, at the end of the Bible says it goes like this. Now, where we are along this precipice place, we don't know, which is why I act. But the beautiful thing is, even once it does crash, because it does, the corruption implodes on itself like a black hole, that's not the end. That's the end of the system, and then Christ comes back to rule as king, and that's my ultimate hope. But in the meantime, I'm going to be earthbound active, and I don't see any other way than to be locally, to become a part of the solution, to become part of the political texture. By actually running for office, we can win. We can actually win city council elections and school trustee elections. And then we sit there and start saying, yeah, no, and masturbation in kindergarten, no, I don't think so. And parents are going to be like, finally, somebody's saying what we're thinking. Stuff like that.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Actually? Yeah, at the end of the day, it's not our plan, it's his, right? For those who do believe, and I'm not saying that you should or shouldn't, I'm just saying from my perspective, and I think from Emmanuel's perspective, we share that. So it is his. But in the meantime, to your point, if you know the difference between common law and civil law systems started in Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar said, I bow before no God. And that put government over God. Well, in a common law system, it's God, man, government. In that order, our sovereign rights either come for those who believe that comes from a creator, for those who don't believe, which is, again, totally fine, it comes from your natural rights through your birthright of being born. It's in your humanity, as Andrew Napolitano would say. It comes from your humanity or from a creator. The point is I think, is that we all need to really step up in our education and in voicing our knowledge about sovereignty. You as a human being standing before government, government serves you in a common law system, and you are sovereign. And I think, you look at the Quebec example, where Quebec over the COVID lockdowns, they run on a civil law system. They don't run on English common law. Therefore, they were able to implement a much more strict and stringent law because government comes above God, right? So the more we understand about our universality or sovereignty over the state, and the more we educate and the more we advocate for that, which is, I'm talking about a Pandora's box once you start really digging into self-sovereignty. Are you really a taxable citizen, or are you a taxable corporation that works for the corporation of the province or country that you are in? Now that's a deep hole, right? But that's the reality.
Okay. Check 1, 2. There we go. I appreciate everything that you all have had to say, and it's very, very good information. But I still have a question pertaining to those, and there are many, who do not have the excess funds for these kinds of investments, who don't have the funds to even be able to try to put their hat in the ring for elections and run to try to create positive change. What do you suggest for those? Because as far as I can see, unless we all pull together like really tight-knit family and help one another, none of us are going to survive, because it's not going to get better. We all know what Revelations has to say and the other prophecies in the Bible. It's not going to get better. We do know that Christ will be coming eventually. We just don't know exactly when. How much of the nastiness will we have to endure in the meantime? We need to pull together to be able to survive that, or else no one will survive. So what are we going to do to survive that in the meantime until the end?
You moving into my house tomorrow? Let's go. If you don't, again, if you don't have certain resources, you can support the people running. You can support things like this. You can spread the message. You can go in. This should be a touch point for all of you guys to start educating yourselves, doing your own research, right? Where you start to get so knowledgeable of the mechanics of what's going on that not only are you foolproof, even as things get worse, but you're more effective at opening the eyes of those whose eyes can be opened. All you can do is all you can do. And again, I believe the same thing as you, that eventually the system crashes. That's prophecy. Where we are on that line, there was times in history where it looked pretty bad. World War II. And then what happens after World War II? The most prosperous, peaceful time in human history. That was a surprise, right? I don't know, I can definitely get into a warped mindset of being like, it's not gonna get better, we're done. And then I'm reminded that's never been a standing command from our Lord, to be hopeless. And we don't know where we are on the timeline. There could be another season of grace, let's say we go through 20 years of fighting this and we reignite the people, which was the way this society was built. There was no aristocrats or monarchs here. We just trudged one step ahead from the East Coast to the West Coast, ranchers, farmers. It was the people. Maybe this is an opportunity for God to say to us, are the people strong enough to rule themselves again, to do something, to fight back, right? Starting small, growing bigger. Maybe we win this particular season of history. Maybe it's the end. But either way, we got to do something.
Do you not think, though, it's prudent that while you're doing all these
Yes.
things, trying to affect positive change,
Yep.
that we also prepare for worst case
100%.
scenarios, just like
Yep.
in Egypt, they store up
100%. Which is why the whole idea for the money talk, whatever you have, keep it safe. If you can buy, to be perfectly transparent, we're thinking about a move to a place where we can buy large pieces of land and be self-sustaining, right? I'm not running now, but I may end up running, right? But not everybody can do that, right?
You're just running for politics.
Yeah, I'll run for office. I would love to debate Ben Isett and Jeremy Loveday. Love it. But anyways, who knows if they'll let me within 100 miles of, I'm radioactive.
I have a question for Michael. I really appreciate what you said about the insurance having a different liability than other assets. I don't really know anything about insurance other than car insurance and house insurance, so you're actually talking about another type of insurance. Could you explain that for somebody like me who doesn't know?
Ooh, in 5 minutes or less? I'll just take the last, 27 years of my life and condense it into 2 minutes. Yeah. Again, like I think I mentioned, it's the contract wording that you want, right? That supersedes, it doesn't supersede the law. The law supersedes the contract because it predated the law by 20 years, right? It also predated the Income Tax Act by 70 years. So therefore, it has that precedence. And you want to make sure that the contract is very specific to a cash balance. Although there needs to be a need for a death benefit in order for you to qualify for it. You could put it on your kids or your grandkids if you don't qualify or whatever. But it needs to be a dividend-paying, participating, whole life insurance contract that is designed for capital accumulation.
Okay, so it's a life insurance, a whole life insurance. That's what it
Correct,
is.
but it's very specifically designed because you don't want to pay large premiums to that.
So talk to you afterwards is what you're saying.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks.
So we're going to wrap up this part of it. So we're going to be mingling in the back. Becky is going to be at the table for homeschooling questions. Thank you. This is what we need, guys, for you guys to support us like this. If you've gotten a piece of paper handed to you on the way in, at the whatchristiansbelieve@gmail.com account, that's the account for this. Just send me a name if you want to be told about future events, because right now, next week is the We Unify event. After that, I don't know what we hold for the future in the summertime anyways. We might take a break. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys in the back.